A crise do sistema financeiro internacional é um assunto bastante atual e de interesse geral para os analistas de relações internacionais, uma vez que ela acaba criando situações imprevisíveis para as organizações. E para tratar desse assunto hoje, nós convidamos o nosso professor Rolf Shöndorff, que é professor da Universidade de Amsterdã na área de Economia Política Internacional. Dr. Rolf, como o senhor iniciou a sua visita, os seus contatos aqui no Brasil?
After my retirement as a professor in General Economics at the University of Amsterdam in Holland, I got acquainted with students doing research in foreign countries. And those students, they sold their pesquisa, their research to Dutch enterprises. They organized the whole thing, and we were there as teachers to help them do their research, write a paper on it, and after that sometimes we made a small booklet. For instance, we made a booklet how to do business with Brazil.
Quando foi a primeira vez que o senhor visitou o Brasil?
In autumn 1998 I came back to write about the possibility of a devaluation of the real, and I went to Brasilia to talk with people of the Ministério da Fazenda, and I was very much impressed by their quality. Most of them studied at Princeton, at Harvard, and in general I'm very much impressed with the hospitality and the kindness of the Brazilian people.
Professor, falando sobre a crise financeira de hoje, o senhor acha que haverá uma recessão mundial?
The financial crisis originated in the problem with mortgages, bad loans in banks in America. They took high risks there. The banks sold those mortgages one to another, and those fantasy products were when the housing market collapsed, they were practically worthless, and so there was a big problem for the banks. They didn't trust each other anymore. By the way, it's a shame that these days we can hear Dr. Alan Greenspan, the former president of the Federal Reserve System in the United States, apologize. He apologizes for not being aware of the high risks that were taken by the banks. Now, I would say, Dr. Greenspan, come on, how long do we know that markets can fail? Markets can fail. This is a typical example of asymmetric information. Bank A doesn't know about Bank B, and Bank B doesn't know about Bank A. They do not trust each other, and so there will be no transaction. That's how the money flow dries.
O senhor acha que a crise financeira vai criar realmente uma recessão?
Yeah, I think we see now that the world is getting into a deep recession, the world as a whole already. For instance, 2 weeks ago, the British paper, The Economist, wrote an article about containers at sea, for instance, with iron cargo from Australia to China, or with cheap textile from China to Europe, and those vessels, they stopped in the harbor because the banks couldn't guarantee the letters of credit.
E no nosso dia a dia, o que afeta?
Now, as consumers, we are postponing our purchases because we are insecure about our jobs, about the future, about our saving deposits. We lost a lot of money on the stock exchange, and that doesn't bring consumers in a spending mood. So that's one party. On the other side, and as a consequence of this, investors, producers don't invest. or postpone investments. And if they try to invest, the bank will be very difficult to give them a credit, or give them a credit at a higher price. So what's left is government that could stimulate the economy by having a budget deficit which they can regulate in better times. So that leaves government to do the necessary spending. Government will receive less taxes because there will be less profits. They will have to spend more on unemployment. Then there will be a budget deficit, but this can have an anti-cyclical effect. There we are coming into the theory of John Maynard Keynes.
Professor, nós entendemos que a crise financeira internacional ela acaba sendo mais severa nos Estados Unidos e na Europa do que aqui no Brasil. Qual o motivo dessa diferença?
As far as I understood, Brazilian banks were not allowed to have more than 20% of those financial fantasy products, those poisoned assets on their balance. And in Europe and in the United States it was unlimited. I think that's the reason that Brazilian banks have less problems now.
Professor, em alguns comentários sobre a crise financeira internacional, nós ouvimos novamente o nome de Keynes. A gente pensava que ele estivesse morto.
Indeed, he died in 1946, and in the 60s and the 70s, when we were all prone to supply-side economics, monetarism, we thought the fine-tuning the economy along the Keynesian receipt was finished. But I don't think a theory is right or wrong. A theory is relevant in some times and not relevant in other times. And I think in these days the theory of Keynes will be relevant again, and government will stimulate the economy along Keynesian ways. But then we have to be careful that we not stimulate in a pro-cyclical way. The critique of former times was that government is always too late to perceive what to do. Then they stimulate, and then the economy is already on its own, expanding, and so they move pro-cyclical. We should be very careful with that. But we learned a lot. But you can see economic policy is a very tricky matter.
Professor Rolf, muito obrigado pela sua entrevista aqui para o Cenário Internacional. E para vocês que nos assistem, aguardem que em breve voltaremos com novos assuntos.